the service where the information goes upstream. Everything kind of goes upstream. So when they have these judicial committees, those are documents. And those documents go up to the corporate entity, to what they call the service department of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're maintained in a database. And the governing body of the organization is informed of everything. They have their own committees. They are a working group. They dictate policies. They have committees that coordinate with what they call the United States branch and branches around the world. So this goes all the way up the chain to the top. And that's why we're suing the top this time around. We haven't done that in our other cases, but we're going to do it here.
You know, for years, over a century, the Watchtower has been foretelling the coming Battle of Armageddon, where the wicked nations will be destroyed at the hand of God. This has been the thing that's kept us all in fear, doing 90 hours a month and getting to the meetings and shunning our families. But it was all myth, and we came to understand that we'd been lied to. And that was the thing that drove me out of the Watchtower. It wasn't because I was disgruntled. It wasn't because I was bitter or twisted or wanted to pursue sin. I had a crisis of faith, and I realised I had been lied to. I didn't know what to do with that. And this organisation's gotten away with it for years. I mean, you look at companies like Viagogo. Viagogo is a ticketing reseller platform, and they're in a lot of trouble in Australia. The ACCC is going after them, and they're trying to shut them down. The federal court's putting their full weight behind the ACCC in Australia because they're misrepresenting themselves online as being the official ticket seller. And they are putting this false sense of urgency around the tickets they're selling, a false sense of limitation and urgency, and people are falling for it. You know, this is fraudulent behaviour. And that's exactly what the Watchtower's done to us, right? It's positioned itself as being the only official channel for God on earth. They've made up this artificial sense of urgency about the times that we're living in. Every generation from the late 1800s right through to today believe that they're the generation that's not going to grow old. That was one of the big shocks for me, especially reading Rutherford's books about how, you know, everyone back then in the 1920s believed that they were going to live forever. They were never going to die. Everybody, every Bible student back then. So where am I getting to with this? For a long time, the Watchtower has flown under the radar, and this has been something that ex-JWs or activists have been lamenting. It's like, how on earth have they been able to get away with this for so long? And prior to the internet, it would have been very frustrating for activists, I can imagine, who knew exactly what the Watchtower was all about, and they were sort of powerless. All they could do was sort of write letters and produce books, but it was very difficult. And today the world's changed, and transparency is the order of the day. And as a result of that, the Watchtower's in a lot of trouble, and their Armageddon is coming at a rate of knots. I was just listening to the Zalkin law firm press release, and there's 3 videos. I'm going to stitch them together and post them in this upload. In this particular case, they're covering Michael and Heather. I can't remember their last names, but 2 individuals who were sexually abused. I've been down at the park and I've listened to the videos. It's really moving listening to their case. And what I'm asking is that if you guys can go to the links that I provide below in the description and post your support to the law firm and for Michael and Heather. You know, don't write stuff like, oh, you know, I hate the Borg and it's about time they got their just desserts. Like, post positive, encouraging messages of hope and your support for Zalkin, and give them a thumbs up. I've focused on a lot of things. Sorry, I'm feeling a bit emotional right now because I was so moved by what those 2 individuals have gone through. It was just terrible, the way pedophiles groom young children. I don't have children of my own. You know, I've been with the same partner for, 13 years, and, she's the love of my life. And when I met her, she had a 9-year-old son. He's my best friend. And the thought of anything ever happening to him like that, I think, on a positive note, the thing with sorry, I'm a bit choked up. The thing with the Watchtower and this whole thing with the ARC and the problem with pedophilia in the organisation is the silver lining is this really exposes everything that's wrong with the organisation. I've been focused on the dates and different doctrinal issues purely to provide content that I'd wished I'd had access to when I was waking up, because it's something I have expertise in and a real understanding on. For others, it's other areas, and people wake up for different reasons. But the thing with the child sexual abuse cases is it's highlighting everything. It's really shedding light on the entire top to bottom problem within the organisation. You know, parents are so indoctrinated by the Watchtower, they're oblivious to the fact that their child's being raped. You know, imagine that. Imagine having a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old that is being raped by an elder in the organisation and being oblivious to that. It's not because the parents don't love the child, it's because they love the Watchtower more and they're completely indoctrinated. They're not even aware that it's going on. And the fact that we know over and over and over, they're constantly being told, the victims and their families are being told to go to the elders, don't go to the authorities, don't bring reproach on Jehovah's name. And what's really coming out is, as you guys would know, is there's a lot of activists out there doing amazing work who are capturing witnesses denying the fact that this is going on and saying, no, we go straight to the police.
Again, they sensationalize things. Our stand as Jehovah's Witnesses, we do not condone child abuse, anything like that. And when those types of things are brought to our attention, say an example, somebody gets molested, a child gets abused, it is up to that child or the parents to take the steps they need necessary to rectify it, like going to the authorities. We do not tell them not to. We leave it up to them to decide how they'll handle it. You know,
why don't you call the police on the guy if they are accusing him, so that professionals who are trained in how to investigate those things?
Here's what we do. We call our legal department when we hear of any kind of molestation.
Oh, goodness. So, you don't call the police, just call the Watchtower?
Here's the thing.
Oh, my goodness.
Now listen, in some states, as an example, in this state of Ohio, you yourself, if you heard of something like that, you aren't required to call the police yourself. It is not something you're required to do.
Well,
I don't know.
Who cares what the law is? Why wouldn't you? Wouldn't you want? Are you guys experts at investigating a thing like that? I mean, okay, let's.
You didn't hear what I said. If something happens like that to some child, the parents can call the police. You understand that? If you had a child and that happened to your child, you would call the police. Am I right?
Yeah, and I hope my church will call the police also, whether or not the parents would want to.
We have to call our legal department. They would direct us on what to do.
Wow.
What are you asking this for?
This really is the biggest problem in the organisation, and it will be the thing that will bring the Watchtower down. It's just shocking. It's really shocking. I remember when I watched the Australian Royal Commission when it was going on, I was stunned. I just could not believe how egregious the Watchtower's behaviour's been. It's just, I was stunned. It took me a while to process it. And I'm sure you guys feel the same way, especially for those of you that have kids of your own. But anyway, look, all I'm asking, if you guys are still listening to this, is please go to the Zalkin Law Firm, click on the links, provide the description below, and give your support for Heather and Michael. I'm sure Angus Stewart from the Australian Royal Commission was blown away by the amount of support and praise he got from the XJW community. And let's give that same support to the Zalkin Law Firm as well for what they're doing. I mean, I get it, they're a business and they obviously have, an end game in mind as well, but the fact that they're prepared to, you just listen to the way they're talking about Heather and Michael, you can tell that they genuinely care about this and they're absolutely indignant as to the way the Watchtower's been operating. So anyway, that's just a quick update from me. Take care, guys. I'll see you on the next video.
Is Irwin Zalkin of the Zalkin Law Firm, IRWIN Zalkin. I'm here with my co-counsel, Michael Barish, BARASCH of Barish McGarry, here in New York. Thank you all for coming. We are announcing today that we will be filing 2 lawsuits on behalf of 2 victims, or I should say survivors, of sexual abuse, child sexual abuse within the Jehovah's Witness organization. And that is thankfully due to the legislature and our governor passing the Child Victims Act, that our 2 clients, Heather Steele and Michael Ewing, had this opportunity. Now, most of you have probably heard about priest abuse and clergy abuse within the Catholic Church, but the Jehovah's Witnesses have been flying a little bit under the radar, and we want to make sure that that doesn't continue. Our law firm, the Zalkin Law Firm, has filed at least 24 lawsuits around the country, and this was probably the 25th and 26th lawsuits against the Jehovah's Witness organization, because this organization has allowed the sexual abuse of children to fester within its ranks for decades. And it has allowed it to happen because it is a very secretive and insular organization. And it's that the secretness of that organization that has allowed what I refer to as a crisis of silence. Child sexual abuse is pervasive and it is serious within this group. And these lawsuits are being filed, and in particular, to draw attention to the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses is like the Pope is to the Catholic Church. Their organization is headquartered in New York State. They are now in Tuxedo Park. They used to be in Brooklyn. And they manage the governing body. These 8 individual popes, if you will, are responsible for everything that happens within that organization. They call the shots. They dictate policies and procedures that are to be followed by all of the elders in some 14,000 congregations in the United States. Now, just to give you a sense of the depth and the breadth of the problem, in Australia, in 2017, a government-appointed royal commission investigated the Jehovah's Witnesses there, a population of about 67,000, and determined that there were 1,800 molested children and about 1,000 perpetrators. Now translate that to the United States, where we have, what, about 2 million Jehovah's Witnesses. Our firm discovered very early on in our litigation that the Jehovah's Witnesses maintain a database of known child molesters that dates back decades. At first, they lied to us in the reports and said they had no such database. But through persistence, we learned that they do in fact have a Microsoft SharePoint database that is searchable, and now they've been ordered to produce these documents. And they have refused court orders repeatedly, and to this day have never produced in compliance with court orders. They're taking the issue to the United States Supreme Court. We, of course, will be opposing that. Now, in the case of Michael and Heather, their stories are unfortunately too typical of what we see within the Jehovah's Witnesses. And they're going to tell you a little bit about their stories. Michael, who's 48, was sexually abused. 47? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to your word. 47, who was sexually abused when he was 14 years old, that carried on for about 3 years. His parents were very close. His father was an elder to another family, and the perpetrator was a ministerial servant, which is equivalent to a deacon, more or less. And because of that close relationship, Michael Rust, this perpetrator, gained access to Michael Ewing, our client. And the Jehovah's Witnesses, so you know, they live in this sort of parallel universe. They believe that they live in what they call the truth. And the rest of us, we live in this outside world contaminated by Satan, and they find us to be what they refer to as bad association. So they don't really associate with the outside world other than what is necessary, of course, to go to work or go to school, but they are very insular and very close with each other, and they are taught since they're little children that they are to obey without question the elders and the leadership of their congregation, and certainly of the hierarchy of the organization, and you'll notice I keep calling it an organization. They do not call themselves a church. They do call themselves an organization. Go to jw.org. So Michael was molested by Mike Rust for 3 years, and at some point, when Michael was 21 years old, and he could no longer take the pain that caused him, the embarrassment, the shame that he was feeling, he disclosed that abuse. And the elders were advised of that. And they conducted their judicial committee, this tribunal that they conduct. And what was the result? Michael was disfellowshipped, which is the equivalent of being excommunicated. Why? Because at the age of 14, they considered that he had engaged in homosexual conduct and did no longer deserve to be a member of that religion or that organization. As was Michael Rust. They were both disfellowed. So Michael suffered punishment for what he experienced. Heather's family has a similar story. They were very close to Don Nicholson, who was an elder in her congregation in Wallsburg, New York. And the two families became very close. Her father was an elder and happened to also be a police officer. They spent a tremendous amount of time together, the two families. Nicholson had 2 children, 2 little girls of his own. What they didn't know in about 1979 or so, when the abuse started, she was 78, when she was about 2 or 3 years old, what her family didn't know is what the elders of their congregation knew, and that is that Don Nicholson was a pedophile. He'd abused his own daughters and others. All told, we know of about 18 women, girls, who've been abused by this guy. At some point, when about 1982, someone else also reported Nicholson, and Heather and her family reported Nicholson. And they converged on the family, elders, what they call circuit overseers, who go around and they do a circuit on behalf of the watchtower and the organization, the hierarchy of the organization, and check on the different congregations. And they converged on the family and said, don't go to the police. Whatever you do, don't go to the police. Don't bring reproach upon Jehovah. God forbid. They didn't care about Heather. They didn't do anything. They disfellowshipped him. That means they excommunicated him. But they didn't tell anyone in the congregation why. They never do. They never do. The secret remains within a select few elders and the governing entities of the watchtower. They discouraged going to the police. Now, Heather's father was a police officer. He was very conflicted. What do I do? He was so indoctrinated by the belief that he went to the elders. He didn't go to the police. The police found out because her school found out. And they were mandatory reporters, as are the clergy of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're mandatory reporters, but they just don't do it. But the police did. And there was an investigation, and Nicholson was pled guilty and spent 3.5 years in prison. He's out. He's become a Jehovah's Witness again. He's been in the organization. He's been disfellowshipped, I think, 2, 3, maybe 4 times. She'll tell you the story. And despite the fact they've known of the abuse of multiples of young girls like this. So this story needs to be told. These lawsuits are going to tell this story, and I'm going to introduce Michael to you, and he's going to start and tell you a little bit about his story. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Michael won. I think you want to say
I just want to. Hi, I'm Michael Barish. I'm local counsel, and I'm honored to be that. Thank you. I have to tell you, my firm has represented nearly 600 abused kids, and it's outrageous that it takes a lawsuit to bring justice to these people who in many cases have been waiting 20, 30, 40, in some cases 50 years. But we are going to make these people pay. We're going to get the answers that they deserve. I have to give Michael and Heather credit. You have no idea how brave you need to be to come and tell your story. We are not the story. They are the story. We're just lucky enough and thankful enough to be given the opportunity to get you guys the justice you deserve, and we will get the answers that you deserve as well. So Michael, why don't you get up and...
So, basically my childhood growing up was pretty normal. Typical Jehovah's Witness life, minister going out in this administrative service every Saturday morning, going to meetings 3 times a week, going to our conventions, learning what we learn through our parents and through what the organization teaches us. So I felt like, well, I need to get baptized. This is something I want for my life. This is what I want to do, which is the picture of me actually getting baptized. I was 14 years old on that day. And on that day I met my abuser. That was my reward, right, for dedicating my life to God. Going forward from that point, I wanted to do regular pioneer work, which meant 80 hours a month of volunteer service. And I filled out the application, was approved. Mike Rust, the abuser, was also a regular pioneer and a ministerial servant in the congregation. And he was introduced to me through my father and through other elders. They knew that he worked with the younger brothers in the congregation to help them move forward and become stronger spiritually, supposedly. In the beginning, at the age of 14, when I first met him, we were going out in service a lot, and things kind of seemed normal. This would be the grooming process. As you would continue to go out in the ministry, it would lead to, at some point, probably a couple months after, maybe a month and a half, where we would go and have study. And we would study at his house, where at that point, I was then introduced to pornographic material. Started out as Victoria's Secret catalogs, moved forward more into pornographic material. That went on for a few months. Then it turned into truth and dare games, turned into, whatever. At about 9 months after I met him is when the touching began. Just like in the movie Spotlight, I happened to watch that before I got here, so I'm going to just lay it out there. I had to perform fellatio many times, hundreds. There was a couple other occasions where it got more serious even than that. So I went through this for about 3 years. Remembering that the hours that you do as a pioneer is 80 hours a week, and I'm 80 hours a month, and I'm to be with him. Well, I'm with him 80 hours a month to do this supposedly. So he had an open access to me. I would probably see him 4, 5 times a week. My parents loved him. They did not know what was going on. I did not know how to tell them what was going on. I was ashamed. So I just let it continue to go on because I didn't know how to tell them, and I didn't know how to get away from him. So I was in a real pickle. By the time I was 17, I learned how to break away from all that. I got away from him. I got away from basically my parents' beliefs. I started engaging in drugs, and I started to become a very violent person. Nobody could understand why I was this way. My parents couldn't understand it. They're all on like, what's going on? And I just kept running from the situation. By the time I was 21, as Irwin said, 20 or 21, and I'm really not sure which age group, but in that range, I decided to tell my father and my mother what I had dealt with. And when I explained it to him, my dad's first reaction is, he's an elder in the congregation, was, we gotta tell the elders. Not let's call the police, not let's get you some help, not this, that, and the other, we gotta tell the elders. So we told the elders, and my father made a phone call to Mike Rust, said you need to tell your elders, because at that point now we were separate congregations. And so he did. Now, to my knowledge of this, and the way Jehovah's Witnesses do work, judicial committees are private. They do not discuss what's going on across the board. They don't discuss his situation with my elders to discuss with what I had said. They both just decided to disfellowship the two of us for homosexual activity. And of course they also used the fact that I was using drugs as well at that time as part of the disfellowshipping. That was the only way I knew how to really deal with my situation, to try to numb down that pain. Drinking. Yeah, so here I am today now. All these years I've been fighting with this, trying to figure out how to handle this, try to know how to do this. What do I do? I actually still proclaim to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. That's my faith structure. That is the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with, is trying to hold on to something that I learned as what I believe to be true because of what I've learned through the scriptures. But then to also have to see this. And believe me guys, and I'm sure you've all researched it. I know I started researching it this year. It's scary how much this is going on throughout this organization and how it seems to be just pushed aside. That can't happen anymore. And that's why the two of us are here. That's why I'm here. It cannot happen anymore. I'm here to make sure it doesn't happen anymore. I'm here to make sure that if there's any voice out there that sees me at my age, recognizing, even if they're older, that it's time for them to come forward, because it has to happen. This has to be cleansed. It has to be taken care of. So what I hope from all of this is that we start to hear more victims coming forward, whether they're children or grown adults as I am. It's got to be taken care of.
Mike, before you leave, I think they find it interesting. What did he read to you to justify the conduct?
He would many times, because if I felt guilty or if I felt something this isn't right, I would get a scripture read to me. We would go into, at that time we had a book in the organization called the Youth Book. There were chapters in there with scriptures in there that were, talking about puberty and going through the change of life and sexual this and that. And somehow he would take the scriptures and he would flip it and make me feel like this is okay, it's normal. I don't know. I can't explain why I went for it, but I did. And, that's what I have to carry. I still have nightmares. 40's gonna be 48 this year. I still have nightmares. And it's kind of getting lost for words here, but all I knew is that this has got to stop.
My name is Heather Steele. I'm 48 years old. I was born into the religion, so I didn't know anything different. My parents were best friends with two other elder families, one of them being Don Nicholson. He built my parents' house. He was a contractor. He built his house, and they were almost identical. He started abusing me while I was still in diapers, so 2 or 3, I'm not even sure. The abuse went on for about 10 years. Gradually, it started out as fondling and stuff, but it did go to oral, and it did go into actual rape after many years. By the time I was about 10 years old, I accidentally told my mom. I was scared to tell. I thought that it was a secret and it was between me and Dawn, and I did not realize that there was a whole world out there that would say this isn't right, this is not what's supposed to be happening.
You're doing great.
Okay, so When I actually came forward, like I said, it wasn't on purpose. We had seen a video at school, and I came home and asked my mom questions, and when she gave me the answers, I realized that what was going on was completely wrong. He had used Jehovah as a lot of when I would question things, and it would be about obeying my elders and respecting parents and everything. So I was very naive to the fact that I didn't have to be living in this kind of situation. I did have the luck of having my father be a police officer, so he definitely believed me. There was no doubt about that. And actually, one of Dawn's daughters, was abused and had come forward. Then she actually recanted because the parents got to her. And shortly after that, I didn't know about Lynn confessing, but I confessed to my mom by accident, and then they put it all together that both of us couldn't be lying. So that's how we started meeting with the Judicial Committee. That was torture. It was a bunch of men sitting around praying for Don, having us hold hands while we prayed for him, and my mother was having nothing to do with that. She took me out of the room and just said that's too much. She doesn't need to be dealing with that. She's dealt with enough. They tried very hard to keep it a secret. The elders met with us probably 5 or 6 times within a month period. Luckily, like I said, my dad was a police officer, so the school got involved, and when the school got involved, my father realized the only choice he really had was to go forward and have him arrested. He did do a couple of years in prison, but he got out, I think only 3 years later. He also had a reunification program at the prison where he abused his own daughters on the weekends. He was, at the time, this was back in the early 80s, he had come forward to about 15 other girls, so definitely wasn't alone. He was so manipulative that if he couldn't have access to me, he would arrange to go into my parents' house when they weren't home, take apart my dad's rifles, put them on my mom's side of the bed, scare my mom basically to death, so she wouldn't want to stay alone in the house while my dad was working overnights as a police officer. So of course he'd be like, oh, just bring them over here. So he would do that. That went on for almost a year. So if he hadn't seen us and had access to us either at the Kingdom Hall or at my parents' house or their house, then he would take those measures to make sure that he could get me back to his house. So I didn't really question anything because I didn't know any different until I got to be about 10, 11 years old, and that's when I came forward, I started to realize how terrible everything really was, and that none of the stuff I had thought was true. I felt guilt because I didn't want to not believe in Jehovah or do something against the religion, but at the same time, I wanted to get away from Don. The reason I'm bringing a lawsuit is because I had no justice in the situation. Yes, he did go to prison, but it was for such a short time, and he found that time to abuse his own daughters. I want to come forward so other people have a voice. It's not an easy situation to come out and tell this kind of story, but if it helps other girls or boys, whatever it is in that congregation, or anywhere actually, I want to do it for that purpose. And with the Children Victims Act passing, we've waited for years trying to get that to pass, and I'm very, very pleased that it went, and we will be able to find some kind of justice for the situations that we were put in as children growing up in that religion. Is there anything else? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. If there's any questions, fire away.
So, New York will open up the window for child victims to sue.
Right.
What?
August 14th.
August 14th. What do you have to prove? What evidence do you have to bring?
Well, you're going to have to show in all of these types of cases, generally they're negligence-based cases, so we're going to have to show that the congregation elders, the Watchtower corporate entity, the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses corporate entity, and the governing body of the organization at the very top, that they were negligent in their policies, in their practices, that they knew They had reason to know that child abuse existed and was a real problem within their organization. They had no policies for protecting children, and that they knew at some level about the propensities of these particular perpetrators at the time that our clients were sexually molested. And then they covered it up. They ratified it. They ratified this behavior, they allowed it, they covered it up, they accepted it. In other words, if they didn't do anything about it, they essentially accepted it. So that's the kind of stuff we're going to need to prove. I think we're going to be all right.
So you don't need to prove individual molestation in each case. You don't need to prove that the elder necessarily committed the act, or
oh yeah, no, I mean
can you kind of explain?
Well, that's sort of the gravamen of the case is that they were sexually abused by these guys, right? So we're going to have to prove that happened.
How do you do that so many years
later? Because
later?
there's so many people that they're not alone. And Rust has already admitted that he did it. Nicholson has admitted that he did it in these judicial proceedings, judicial committee proceedings. So I think we'll be able to convince that, and I think they're very credible people, so I think that any jury's going to believe that this happened to them. So that's sort of the first step. I mean, obviously we have to prove it happened, but beyond that, then we have to prove who's legally responsible for what happened. Of course, the perpetrator's legally responsible, but then these other parties within the Jehovah's Witness organization are legally responsible. The congregation where this happened, the elders of the congregation who knew about both of these guys in advance, and knew while it was happening. The people who oversee the congregations, the Watchtower corporate entity, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York, the service where the information goes upstream. Everything kind of goes upstream. So when they have these judicial committees, those are documents, and those documents go up to the corporate entity, to what they call the service department of the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're maintained in a database. And the governing body of the organization is informed of everything. They have their own committees. They are a working group. They dictate policies. They have committees that coordinate with what they call the United States branch and branches around the world. So this goes all the way up the chain to the top. And that's why we're suing the top this time around. We haven't done that in our other cases, but we're going to do it here.
Is there a precedent for naming the top religious leaders in clergy abuse cases, period? I mean, has the Pope ever been named?
You know, the unique circumstance here is that we have the equivalent of the Pope that's a resident of the United States and operates out of the United States, specifically the state of New York. So they're not a sovereign entity like the Vatican and the Pope, which makes it near impossible to sue the Pope. I know some of us in the past have tried, but it does. This is a different situation. You have a United States domiciled entity, a group of guys that are calling these shots, and I think they're going to be amenable to being sued in these lawsuits here in New York.
Can you talk about where Mike Russ and Don Nicholson are now, and do they still have access to children?
Yeah.
All right, so as far as Mike goes, 3 years when I first got into counseling, because I finally realized I needed to get therapy. We did a Google search, my therapist and I. We found him. He was a youth minister at the Calvary Chapel Boca Raton church. At that point, I wasn't really ready to deal with it. I was still going through my own therapy, and she was like, we gotta do something, we gotta do something. As things started, I learned how through my therapy what needs to happen. I finally got legal representation, and I told him where he was and what he had access to, because he had put himself in position again to be around younger people. He's no longer employed by that church. The church did terminate his position. So I don't know where he's at this moment, but this is within the last month and a half. So as far as I know, he still lives in Boca Raton. As far as I know, he's still unemployed. but Calvary Chapel got on that and took care of that situation. They probably wanted to get in front of it before this happened. He's a bad person. In my mind, I'm sure everybody else here would agree with me, he was a very bad person. I did forget to tell you that when I was around 16, he had been accused of this by another boy in the congregation. And that boy happened to be the son of his fiancée. He was 11, if I remember right. Now, he did get on the phone to me, and he did say, you need to keep your mouth quiet. If someone starts asking questions, you got to stay quiet, because you're going to get in trouble. He assured me I would get in all this trouble. Again, when you can manipulate scriptures the way he knew how to manipulate it, when he knew how to manipulate a person's mind, he had a hold of my mind from the moment I was 14 years old. My therapist, because I go through this like, why? Why did I allow it to go on so long? Once you get a hold of a person and you've manipulated them to a point, they're stuck in that spot. And I fear for any of those children he had access to through Calvary Chapel. He was there for 15 years. I'm sure they're going to conduct their own internal investigation to find out if something had happened. But that's the situation of Mike Rust. He is an unemployed priest right now, and that's that.
Don is currently living in New Jersey. He does have advanced prostate cancer, so he's no longer able to have victims, but for many, many years, his wife would even breed puppies so that there'd be families that would come with their kids and stuff, so it never stopped. Even after he got out of prison, I know of other girls and other people that he's been affecting. So even though he did that short time in prison, he's never really paid for it, and he is living quite comfortably in New Jersey. That's it.
Any other questions?
Do you think that this window opening up is a way that to further the goal that you've had for a long time about exposing this child abuse database? Is there anything about the volume of cases that could come forward that would increase the odds of this database to become public?
Yeah, I'm certainly hoping that the more noise there is about this and the more victims that come forward and the more people start demanding that this database be made public, that this information at least be, at the minimum, be provided to law enforcement. I have some of it under court order. I'm subject to a gag order by several courts, so I can't talk about what I've seen in this database, but I'll leave that to your imagination.
I'd just like to add one thing. All of you have been following this story with rabid interest of Jeffrey Epstein, and obviously his suicide was front page news. It's on the news all day today. This is far, far worse. I'm not condoning anything that Epstein did, but that guy used his money and his power to get women to do what they did for him. These people were abused by eminent emissaries of God, of the church. And as both of them talked, as Michael and Heather talked about, there was an element of trust. And these abusers, these rapists, they abused that sacred trust. And we are going to make them pay for it.
Can Michael and Heather just talk about what's sort of been the most difficult part about all of this over the last few years and getting to the point where you can stand here?
You want to tackle that?
Alright. I was married for 20 years. And throughout that 20-year marriage, I was not a good husband. I'll be the first to say it. I had so many demons in my head. That's how it affected my life. I was an angry person. I drank to conceal that anger. Or not to conceal it, but I drank to try to make myself feel better. But that only got me angrier. Had 2 beautiful children. I wasn't the best father because of what goes on inside me. It wasn't until I got divorced and got introduced to a new woman in my life, who I'm now married to, a beautiful woman, Tracy, and she got me into therapy. Since that point going forward, being in therapy with Solville, my therapist, P.D. McGowan, I have learned how to start dealing with this on an adult level. Because in most cases, for anyone who is trying to hide this type of abuse, or who has to try to pretend it never happened and try to get on with life, you can't. You can try, but you're going to fail if you don't have help. And no one ever got me any help. My wife got me help. As soon as she found out about this, she had me sitting in front of a therapist. And, you know, it affects your life in ways you can't even imagine. You know, you say even over the last couple of years, the last few years I've been in therapy, and it took that therapy to get me to this point where I can have legal representation, where I can have a voice, and I can say something finally, and I can get it out there. Hey, this happened to me. It's not right. It's not right. It's never been right. And everyone just wants to turn a blind eye to it. That's how this seems to work. I hate to say that because, like I said, I still profess to be a witness. That being said, this is scary because I'm just in shock still that this has gone on like this for so many years, and it's still going on. That there are still victims out there. There are still people that are right now currently living through what I went through, which is hell. And again, the voice I'm having here today, the voice Heather has here today, is to bring attention to those victims. We need to find them, we need to get them out there. They need to know they don't need to be scared. Because you can be put, I've been getting texts from my mom and dad all week, this is the wrong thing to do, you can't do this. This is not what you're supposed to do. Those are the people that are supposed to be there to fight for you.
Probably, what's worse is not that they're just victims out there. They're molesters out there. They're still there. They're knocking on your doors. They're standing in the subways. They're in the airports. You don't know who they are because they don't tell you. They don't disclose. They don't warn parents in the congregation that the reason that that man was disfellowship or reproof meaning that he's given a little warning and removed from certain privileges, but there's no announcement made as to why he's being reproved. So people don't know. The ordinary congregants don't know. And for all they know, when they send their kids out on what they call field service to go knock on doors with this pioneer, this person who's maybe in charge of that, they don't know if he's a molester or not.
Are all of your cases filed in New York?
No. We have them all over the country, California, Ohio, Vermont, Connecticut, where else? We file a lot around.
Even though the Jehovah's Witnesses are based in New York?
Yeah.
I just want to answer her question.
Yeah. How it's affected.
Actually, I didn't mention before, but Don used to give us alcohol before we'd go to bed, so that as we got older, I saw him abuse his daughter. We were in the same room a lot of the times, but he would give us orange juice, and it would have vodka in it. So I learned at a really early age that if I didn't want to deal with something, all I had to do was take a couple shots and go to bed. So I did turn into an alcoholic. I did do drugs. I have PTSD. I've been in and out of psychiatric hospitals probably since I was 20. So it's affected me in a lot of different ways, and it doesn't ever get better because a lot of times you're shut down and you don't get to tell your story. That's part of why I'm here today, is so that I can finally say, yes, this is what happened. It was Don Nicholson, and he needs to be publicly known for what he does, and that's about it. Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you. I appreciate it.